first you hear seabirds and the lapping of waves, and of course he drowned in a plane crash. But it was the only song Otis ever had that was number one. And he never actually heard the final mix. And everybody had fought him about even doing the song, let alone putting it out. So Steve Cropper persevered, and the song came out, and it was a number one.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting, because he's definitely had a different kind of vibe, you know. And so, in one sense, I like sitting on the dock of the bay less than some of the other ones, you know, because I kind of relate to the other one better. But there's an energy to him that I think is kind of fascinating. There's something, again, just like we talked about Amy Winehouse, there's just some people, when you look at them, they just jump out to you. I mean, that's what makes the star, right?
Sure.
They have that energy that jumps out. What's your this is an interesting question we haven't talked about. It's something when you look at musicians that, like, I have this thing where what I call the winner's glow. The first time I saw Bill Clinton, I never heard of Bill Clinton. He was in New Hampshire, walking out of some elementary school or something. This was in 1992, and I'd never seen the boy. I heard of him before, and I was married at the time, and I said to my ex-wife, I go, I don't know who this guy is, but he's going to be president. She goes, what are you talking about? I go, he's going to be president. What's his name? Well, I don't know. But he's running for president. They'll say it again in a minute. But he's going to win because there was this energy that just pulsed out of him. It's like, there's certain people that they had that thing. And Otis Redding, when you look at him, had that thing. There's something about him. It was bigger than life, and the energy, kind of the aura, because you can see it on the film, right? You can see it in the film clips from him performing live. There's just something that jumps out about him. And Amy Winehouse had that. You know, the other musicians that have that. Athletes have it sometimes. You see it with tennis players. I predicted only three, junior tennis players when I saw them playing. I said they had something that would make them the number one tennis player in the world. Those players were Stefan Edberg, later became the number one player in the world, Yvonne Lendl, who later was number one in the world, and Roger Federer. Those three, when they were young, they jumped out to me, even though at the time they weren't necessarily considered, any better than anybody else. But they had a certain kind of glow to them. Is there anybody that jumps out to you when you think kind of when I go into the Gary Patterson Encyclopedia of Music, it jumps out to you, it's kind of having that, but you know what I mean, that jumps out to you is having some extra gear that you notice. Because you're a pretty instinctive character. You just have more something to let on and tell people. I got you figured out. But I mean, are the people that just jump out to you as having that special extra thing?
Well, I'll tell you, obviously the Beatles did earlier, but something that jumped out at me was when I heard the first Led Zeppelin album. And when it first came out and I heard Good Times, Bad Times, the opening song on the first track, I knew that this was going to be a super group. And I also know that Led Zeppelin, who knew the members of that band? I mean, Robert Plant was 18 years old. Nobody even knew who he was. John Bonham, he played in the band with Plant. Nobody knew who he was. The most well-known was Jimmy Page, but how many people knew that he was the guitar player on Sunshine Superman and Hurdy-Gurdy Man by Donovan? I mean, he was probably the greatest sessions guitar player in England, but who keeps up with sessions guitar players? And John Paul Jones, producer, sessions musician, unknowns. But they knocked the Beatles off the chart at number one. And when I heard that first Zeppelin album, I knew that there was something great brewing, just for the sound, because I'd never heard anything like it. And I actually saw them on their first American tour when I snuck down to Atlanta and went to the Atlanta Pop Festival. And it was the very first tour they played. So I saw them live. And at that moment, everybody there knew that it was in a moment of greatness. And I knew that this band would really be something unique and something that would last. Because in the late 60s, most of the great bands had already merged. But Led Zeppelin had that spark. So I knew that. I know exactly what you're talking about. But, you know, a group of unknowns who come out, they have it, they create a sound together, and the next thing you know, they're superstars.
You know, what's interesting, too, is that, like in the A&R world, because so much of it's formulaic, that a lot of the real musical geniuses, Kurt Cobain, Nirvana, nobody understood Nirvana when they showed up, they sort of slipped through the cracks. But it's fascinating, too, I think, when you look at that spark that drives, like a Kurt Cobain or some Neil Young, in one sense, comes to mind as similar to that they just have this creative thing that just knows no bounds. But not everybody kind of gets them, you know, right off. Anybody else jump out to you that you can think of that when you saw them, you just knew, right? I mean, I got my own list, and Zeta may have too, but for you, are there other people that you've seen that when you saw them right off, you knew that they were something unique?
Yeah, well, I can tell you that when I first heard Jimi Hendrix, I knew that was something that was going to change the world. And I knew I had to relearn how to play everything on guitar like he did it, because nobody was doing what he was doing. And that was a major impact. I know that Pink Floyd was the same way with me. Kurt Cobain was the same way when I heard Nirvana, because he had that John Lennon-esque writing style for his lyrics. And, of course, you know, when you get the great ones, they die young. And that was the sad thing about Kurt Cobain when he died. His mother said, now he's gone and joined that stupid club. And when she said that, I said, oh, my gosh, that's it. The club, the 27 Club. And, you know, whether it was, you know, of course, one of the great mysteries was, did Kurt Cobain kill himself or was he murdered? I mean, that's something that's going to be discussed for many years to come. And, I mean, I never understood how a man could shoot himself and the fingerprints be rubbed off the shotgun. I mean, normally you don't shoot yourself in the mouth with a shotgun and then wipe the fingerprints off the gun. But it seems like it's closed, as is Jimi Hendrix's murder case is closed, because everyone's dead. Who do you punish? Same thing with Brian Jones. I think the only thing is there's a thing called justice in the names, that these people did not commit suicide, or they did not die an accidental death. But, I mean, we can talk about that for hours, and I did that on Coast to Coast.
You bring up an interesting, I mean, it's kind of interesting here, because Kurt Cobain, a lot of people have probably speculated on that one. You know, is Courtney Love involved? Sure. And there's 10 million different things. You know, Brian Jones, you know, maybe not so much. But Jimi Hendrix, this is a very interesting one, I think, because when you mentioned it to me, I was like, oh, really? Because you were telling me all these people, and, you know, and I was like, really? Really? I'm like, whoa. It's kind of like, you know, when they found that thing with Jack the Ripper, you know, in the DNA.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
For those people who have been conditioned for the last, 44 years to think that Jimi Hendrix had a drug overdose or whatever, you may have some insight into another way to look at that. Do you mind sharing that story? Because this is a fascinating story. I mean, no, this is a crazy story. So, what's your kind of lay out the scene, Sherlock? What do you think's going on here?
Well, let me tell you what happened. Yeah, first of all, what happens is everybody who's written about Hendrix, including myself, going through some well-documented research, found out that no one had interviewed the doctor at the hospital or the ambulance drivers. And the only part of that story was through Monica Damon. So more research has been done. And the thing that always puzzled me was that the doctor at the hospital said that Hendrix was oozing wine from his mouth, a red wine. and that he had half a bottle of wine in his hair and all over his clothes. Now, the story goes he had taken 9 sleeping pills and had asphyxiated when he threw up. And the story goes that the girl who was with him changed her story 3-4 times. She wasn't even there when the ambulance came, and she said that she rode to the hospital. She wasn't there. She didn't come to the hospital. She was with Eric Burden. And the thing that gets me, if you do the toxicology report on Hendrix, he had enough alcohol in his body to maybe make between 3 and 4 beers. Okay? Now, this wine that was oozing out of his mouth, all this wine that they took out with a suction device was not in his bloodstream, which means that he was dead when that wine was there.
He was drinking it after he died. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, the story goes that his manager, Mike Jeffrey, had borrowed $250,000 from the mob to build Electric Ladyland Studios. And Hendrix was leaving him, so that means he would have no money to pay them back. But Hendrix had a $2 million life insurance policy. So if it was an accidental death, Mike Jeffrey would be paid, the mob would be paid, and he would also inherit the royalties from Hendrix's estate. So you have that as a major criteria. I know that when Hendrix's death was announced, Eric Burden from the Animals goes on television in England and says, well, I think Jimmy took his way out. In other words, Jimmy committed suicide. Well, that infuriated Jeffries. He said, no, they had to have an inquest. And when they did, it was death by misadventure, which means that, Hendrix had died accidentally. And, but the story goes, all these people who were close to Hendrix, like Devon Wilson, his famous groupie that he wrote Dolly Dagger for, about a week after his funeral, maybe 2, she takes a swan dive off the Hotel Chelsea in New York. Monica Daneman, the one who told the story about she was his fiancée and made all this up, and the story had changed. After she was taken to court in England, she committed suicide by asphyxiating herself in carbon monoxide. And, all the story changes. The people are there. Now, there's a movie coming out, but the movie coming out on Hendrix is only going to go through 67. And so it's not going to show anything toward the end of it. But, who knows? But, this was a time period when we had presidents assassinated, civil rights leaders assassinated, men who were running for office assassinated because of their views. And we live in a government that, sometimes you have to think that maybe rock and roll is not exactly the way the kids should grow up. I mean, take a look at 1959. All right, 1959, the day the music died. Well, it was really the year the music died. Buddy Holly was dead in a plane crash. Yep. Richie Valens at 17, dead. The Big Bopper killed in the same crash. Chuck Berry was in prison. His career was over for a while. Little Richard had become a minister. He stopped rocking and rolling. Alan Freed, the man who coined the phrase rock and roll, had lost everything due to the payola scandals. And Jerry Lee Lewis had married his 13-year-old cousin. His career was over. And Elvis was in the Army. All that in that year. And, rock and roll changed. It went to the Fabians. It went to the Frankie Avalons and all that. But it wasn't the same. And all those people, yeah. You remember the highlights, don't you? But then when the Beatles landed, they brought it back again. But, it almost ended. It was almost the year the music died. Wow. And I know my friend Peggy has some interesting theories on that plane crash we'll have to talk about sometime.
You're talking about the one that killed Buddy, and you're talking about that crash?
Yep.
Yeah, I knew there was stuff around that.
And her get into that.
Zita, what did you say? I'm sorry, I missed that.
I said I had heard that there was some suspicious stuff around that.
See? Look, here's the problem. That plane takes off. It crashes 9 minutes after takeoff.
Right.
At a full rate of speed right into the frozen ground.
Yeah.
Right? And they blame it on pilot error. Well, I know Jerry Dwyer, who owns the plane, who owned it then, and his wife Barb, and they called me wanting to do a book. So I listened to it for a while, and then I said, let me ask you one question. Do you have the plane? And then it got very quiet. Because that plane hasn't been seen since 1959. Mm-hmm. could be a lot of interesting studies done on